Hidden Fire by Rose Mackey, Book 4 in the Under Violet Sun series. The story. So far in the distant future, Earth has exploded into the galaxy and colonized dozens of planets. During the colonization process, humans realized it was easier to genetically engineer the humans to fit a new planet than terraform an entire planet to their needs. This resulted in a diaspora of human template species that worked together as part of an alliance, pooling their shared economic, social, and military power against alien species. The alliance exists to further human interests in a hostile universe and is highly xenophobic. Felosia and Verit are two colonized human planets, each with different matriarchal societies. Felosians are empaths, and the planet has a majority female population. Their few males are cosseted, petted, and adored, but are not viewed as suitable long-term partners. Many of the Felosians have become dissatisfied with this situation and seek longer-term mates of their own, craving the closeness of a pair bond. Verit is also matriarchal, however there are very few females left. Those that are have formed a ruling class, controlling the violent mercenary clans of feline shifter males. Felosia and Verit came together to co-sponsor a new colony they have named Dalat, hoping that finding mates between them may help solve their shared population fertility issues. A small establishment group from both planets, under the command of Cadet Maral, landed to start the colony building phase. It has worked better than either group could have hoped. Despite some initial social friction, the Felosians and Verit colonists blended well, and there have been 2 successful matings already in the first few months. Unfortunately, the colony has been plagued by problems from the start. There have been multiple instances of sabotage both on and off planet, disrupting their supply chains and placing the lives of everyone on the planet in jeopardy. An investigation was undertaken, and evidence was retrieved pointing to another human planet, Svoboda, as the enemy behind it all. Svoboda is male-dominated and has an open policy of resistance against matriarchal cultures. It was discovered that a rare mineral, Zelan, exists on the planet. Zelan is highly valuable. It has never been found in such large quantities before, and when word gets out that Zelan is present, it will change everything. The fledgling colony is entirely unprepared for the onslaught of thieves and pirates that will descend on their little backwater planet. In investigating the Zelan, the colonists also discovered an ancient sentient alien ship, Casti, who bonded psychically with one of the Felosian colonists, Zira. The only thing more prized than Zelan in the galaxy is ancient alien tech. The colonists have had to go to great lengths to keep this under wraps, including keeping an alliance ambassador named MakenRoy as their captive to prevent him from reporting the situation to the alliance. Matters are coming to a head, and whatever is decided will change the power structure of the galaxy forever. Chapter 1 takes place in parallel with the events of Book 3, Wildfire. Chapter 2 picks up immediately after Book 3. Chapter 5, Confrontation. The hall of the Alliance Council was designed to impress. It had one function only, to convey to the supplicants waiting for entrance that they were insignificant, and that the people waiting inside were infinitely more important. Maral hated it. She hated everything about the architecture, the concept. The very air breathed with machinations and rattled her empathic senses, giving her a headache. Everything was white. White stone floor, polished to an ankle-breaking sheen. White walls soaring high into the air, the space cavernous and echoing. Every few meters the walls were punctuated with doors or niches with statues, white again, spot-lit with subtle lighting from various angles. Little groups of tables and chairs dotted the chamber for the waiting petitioners. At the end of the long, rectangular waiting hall, 5 shallow steps rose to a set of giant blue filigree doors. The doors were the sole bright splash of colour in the stark chamber, and they drew supplicants to them unerringly. The Verit Felosian party did not wait in the hall. Given the seniority of the group, they marched briskly to the doors, which opened for them as they approached. The Alliance Council was waiting in all its overblown formality. The council table was a half-moon of solid black stone, shocking and foreboding against the sea of white. In the centre were the 3 elected council governors. On either side were 2 advisors drawn from the pool of the representatives of the Human Template Alliance of Planets. Adam Lesk, Speaker of the Chamber, sat front and centre. He was tall, ruddy-skinned and notoriously short-tempered. Hailing from Summer, a Gen 1 colony and home of the Alliance business interests, he was politically astute and hugely influential. If they had any hope of convincing the Alliance to take action, they needed Adam on their side. To his right was their primary adversary, Nulium, Svobodan ambassador, and newly elected as one of the 3 governors for this season. To Adam's left was Valhoz, representative from Uzbek, the final governor. Another problem: Uzbek was a Svobodan colony and generally voted with them. Sadai Amira brought herself to a gliding stop and gracefully bowed her head to the speaker. Maman Frey, representative of the Verit matriarch, stopped beside her, regal as a queen, and nodded once sharply. Maral and Frey's aide stood a few steps behind them. MakenRoy had entered with the group, but stood off to the right, clearly distancing himself from them and the ensuing drama. She huffed. Typical Malurian manoeuvring, never giving away political advantage unless they had to. Maral had not had a chance to discuss the engagement with MakenRoy since the meeting. Both of them had been hustled off with their respective people to discuss the details of the arrangement. She snuck a look at him, but true to style, his face and emotional shields gave nothing away. He was so infuriatingly controlled, it needled her. She really, really hated not being able to read him. She turned her attention back to the speaker. He rapped a gavel on a stone plinth on the table. "We welcome the representatives from the Verit and Phalosian planets and their associated colonies. We have granted your request for an urgent audience and a closed session. Please state your business." Adam Lesk was calm, his voice surprisingly light for such a big male. He appeared every inch the statesman and had held the position of Speaker of the Chamber for the last 3 seasons. Maral, ever so gently, pushed out the slightest tendril of her empathic senses, letting it spool out into the room, weaving through the empathic vibrations, taking its emotional temperature. The Malurian and Svobodan had varying degrees of telepathic and empathic shields, but Maral was one of the strongest empaths ever produced by Phalosia. Even the slightest leak of emotion would reveal itself to her. As expected, Amira was calm, collected. "On behalf of Verit and Phalosia and our associated colonies, we present a complaint to this council against Svoboda. The charge is interference in another colony's operations through violent incursions, disruption of supply chains, and sabotage." The council didn't blink, didn't respond. There was simply nothing. Maral sucked in a breath. Her senses did not detect any shock. In fact, she detected satisfaction. Her blood ran cold and she saw a slight stiffening of Amira's back. Amira's charge was not unexpected. They wanted this. Maral realized her sister must have extended her own empathic senses and come to the same conclusion. Something was very wrong here. Adam spoke again. "This is a serious charge indeed. Do you have any evidence?" "We do. We are streaming it to you now." Amira turned to Maral and nodded, and Maral initiated the data stream to the council's connection as Amira continued. "As you will see, we have obtained clear evidence that the Svobodan government has authorized and paid for mercenaries to interfere with our supply lines, plant saboteurs, and most recently, land troops on our planet." Nulium appeared incensed. "This is disgraceful. How dare you approach the council with this nonsense and impugn the name of Svoboda?" Maral frowned, trying to get an empathic tendril past his shields. She had the oddest feeling that she was watching a play, that his bluster was just that. "Be calm, Representative Nulium. Due process will be followed," Adam soothed him. Each of the councillors stilled as they examined the evidence streaming into their HUDs. After several minutes, Adam refocused his gaze on the supplicants. "We have reviewed the data. Where did you get this from?" "From our intelligence networks," responded Frey smoothly. "We are under no obligation to disclose our sources." Adam frowned at her. "You expect us to take this on face value, without verifying its source?" Frey opened her mouth to retort, and Amira stilled her with a hand. "Of course not, Speaker. We wish you to launch your own investigation." Adam paused for a moment, clearly not expecting the response. "This is your request of the Council. In part, we wish you to investigate these claims. In the interim, we wish you to supervise Svoboda to ensure that no further incidents occur. These are serious claims, and if found to be true, we wish the Council to take decisive action to reprimand Svoboda and prevent reoccurrence. It is a breach of Alliance Charter for one colony to interfere with another." "I see." Adam paused, his face the picture of paternal concern. Too bad his people had no empathic shields. Maral could sense his delight, his triumph. Unfortunately, we cannot investigate this claim as the Council has a prior investigation that takes precedence. Amira controlled her expression, every inch the Ice Queen. No doubt she too could feel his glee, sense the trap before her. What is the nature of this claim that takes precedence over these most serious charges? Nulium smiled at her, venom in his gaze. The Council has been informed that the Verit Phalosian faction has been withholding critical information from the Council, information that you are required to disclose under Alliance Charter. And what is that? Amira glanced at Nulium disdainfully. That Colony 29. Dalat Colony, cut in Frey, derailing his monologue. Frey was cut from ice, her pale eyes standing out in a carven face, her gold hair held back from her face by an ornate silver torque that appeared made from metal feathers, curving above her forehead and round to frame her face. It gave her a menacing aspect. "What?" he spluttered. "The people of the colony have named it Dalat, after our beloved goddess in her warrior aspect, both fierce and just." She glared at him, daring him to make an issue of it. Nulium looked like he had swallowed a lemon. "We have discovered that Dalat colony is rich in Zealan. There is also intelligence that suggests you have found ancient alien tech on the planet. Both should have been disclosed to the Council immediately." Frey looked at Adam. "Is this true? Does the Svobodan speak for the Council? This is the investigation that takes precedence." Nulium looked like he was about to have an aneurysm, appalled at being dismissed by a female. Maral felt his animosity leaking past his shields. He hated being dismissed almost as much as he hated they had named their planet after a warrior goddess. "He does," responded Adam. "And how has the Council received this information? Who accuses us?" Adam looked grave. "Valhuo's representative from Uzbek has brought this charge forward." "I see. Svoboda's pet dogs." Amira's voice was caustic. Valhu's opened his mouth to speak, his jowls shaking with rage when she continued over him. "As it happens, we have discovered Zealan. We disclosed this information to Alliance Ambassador MakenRoy on his most recent visit, as required in the Alliance Charter." There was absolute silence in the chamber. Maral was buffeted by the roiling emotions, shock that they had admitted it, a surge of greed, fury at plans disrupted. There were too many threads to pick them all apart. Valhu's huffed. "That does not count. He is not even human template." MakenRoy hissed, a low rattling in his throat that echoed around the room and reached the primitive hindbrain of all present. It was a sound that their shared ancestors had heard in the dark that drove them to hide in caves to fight off their night terrors. "You impugn my race, Uzbek. You disrespect the work I have done under our treaty." MakenRoy was still as a wraith, his voice dark with anger. "Think carefully before you insult the Malurian people again." Maral resisted the urge to cheer. She had to give it to MakenRoy. He was terrifying when he wanted to be. "Of course not, Ambassador. Our apologies." Adam hastened to smooth the gaffe over, glaring at the Uzbek representative. The councillor spoke without thinking. "We value our relationship with our Malurian allies." Valhuz nodded, his eyes wide as he watched MakenRoy like a cobra. Maral resisted the urge to laugh at his pasty-faced fear. At least MakenRoy had one core skill. If she ever needed to scare an opponent in the future, she could just have him stand in front of her and growl at them menacingly. An ancient crone on the far right leaned forward, her skin a dark, faded brown and deeply wrinkled like a nut. "Is it true, Ambassador? Is there ancient alien tech on the colony?" She was Kui, representative of Victory Colony, and an expert in ancient alien tech. Amira motioned MakenRoy forward. "As you can see, the ambassador has returned with us to make his report." "Is it true?" demanded Adam. "Is the planet rich in Zealan?" MakenRoy considered him for a long moment, long enough for Adam to squirm. "It is." "And the tech?" persisted Kui. "Yes, Ancient Mother." MakenRoy spoke respectfully to her. "I have seen evidence of ancient alien tech." He carefully did not mention the entire ship that he had flown on. "As you can see, we have broken no laws. We have disclosed as required to the Alliance representative. The prior claim is invalid. Tell us, how did Uzbek come across this intelligence? Was it perhaps the Svobodan saboteur planted on our planet?" "You accuse us!" Nulium's face was purple with rage. Frey sneered at him. Are you stupid? We just told you we accuse you. Try to keep up, dear. Nulium pointed a bony finger at her. You broke into the Svobodan ambassador's quarters and stole data. This information is illegally obtained. Amira snorted. Don't be so provincial. Every planet has their information network. An anonymous party provided the information and we have verified its provenance. Amira lied through her teeth and you'd never know. Maral was impressed all over again by her sister. Maral looked at the other advisory council members, drawn from a smattering of planets, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Whatever they had been briefed, they had not expected this level of animosity, nor the colony's free admission of the Zealan. They had expected cunning misdirection, not transparency. Amira returned to Adam. Your investigation appears to have no merit. As we have freely disclosed the required information to your representative, we reiterate our complaint and request that you immediately open the Svobodan investigation and take steps to supervise Svoboda in the interim. Adam looked hot, flustered. The meeting was rapidly spiralling out of his control. He looked at the other council members, who looked back with a mixture of irritation and confusion. He focused on MakenRoy. How is it you are here with them, Ambassador? We had heard you were detained on the planet. Is that so? MakenRoy's eyes glowed red, and Maral saw Adam lean back slightly in his chair, as if to avoid his baleful glare. How lucky that I was not, since it appears your rescue was not forthcoming. Maral made a note for the future of how well MakenRoy lied. It was impressive. Such is the Alliance care for my well-being. Adam grunted at him, disgusted. You are dismissed, Ambassador MakenRoy. A council representative will debrief you. Frey snarled, her claws and fangs lengthening. I tire of these games, Speaker. Will you investigate Svoboda? Will you take action? No more dancing around the question. Adam pulled himself up to his full height. Do not speak to us thus, lady. We are the council. You are the petitioners. The council will decide in its own time. No, replied Frey, her voice hard as granite. You govern with the consent of the governed. A fact you seem to have forgotten. We have broken no laws and have been repeatedly subject to attack by Svoboda. If you refuse to intervene, you break the fundamental tenet of the Alliance. No Alliance member must war against another, lest they face reprisal and sanction from all other members. I ask you one last time, will you take action? Adam looked at Nulium, then the other council members. We will consider. Will you take action? Will you launch the investigation? Frey bit off each word as she spoke. Adam snarled. Fine. He was cornered, and he knew it. I will launch the investigation. Nulium gaped at him. And, continued Frey, if the information is verified, will you take action against Svoboda? Yes, he ground out. Amira cocked her head, listening. After a moment of silence, she spoke, her voice eerie. No, she breathed. You won't. She looked straight at Adam. You forget who you speak to. We are Philosian. We can sense your emotions, the direction of your thoughts. She straightened, her voice hardening, losing its dreamlike quality. You have no intention of doing anything. I can sense the web of deceit binding you together. Her gaze travelled over the councillors. Whatever you were told, it has coloured your thoughts. You stink of greed. Her voice was frozen in her anger. You think to take our planet from us. She fastened her eyes on Nulium. And you, Svobodan. Your hatred defines you. It twines around your psyche, has tainted your soul. I trust nothing you or your pet lapdog say. Witch, muttered Nulium, motioning a sign to ward off evil. How dare you question my actions? I have said that I will investigate, and I will... Adam blustered. You know I speak the truth, was Amira's simple reply. Philosians are sought the galaxy over for our ability to define the veracity of statements, to ferret out the truth of negotiations. You have not been honest with us since the first moment we entered. I am a certified Alliance empath. She eyed the other council members. On my oath, these three collude against us. What say you? The other councillors remained silent, caught in indecision. Her gaze moved to Ancient Qui. Consider this, Elder, in your reflections on this moment in the days to come. We gave you this chance to do the right thing, and you have let yourself be blinded by another's hate and greed. She waited another long moment, waiting for the rest of the council to step up. So be it. She moved closer to Frey and held out her hand. Frey grasped it. We are imbued with the power of the leaders of our nations. We declare the Alliance truce with our peoples broken. The council gasped. Frey continued, "You have dealt with us deceitfully, refused to take action when an alliance member has injured another, and sought to protect the wrongdoer. Our people no longer have faith in this alliance. Verit, Phalosia, and our associated planets officially secede from the alliance." Adam laughed, and Maral felt his emotional resonance surge. He was delighted with this turn of events. "You think your few planets can stand against us? If you secede from the alliance, you have no alliance support, no protection against piracy." "We have none now," shot back Amira. "You allow Svoboda free rein to attack us." She smiled grimly. "But we did not say we were alone." Adam chuckled. "What, you think some mercenaries will save you? A few ragged planets against the entire galaxy seeking your Zelan?" Maral felt MakenRoy move behind her and place his hands on her shoulders. The roughness of his palms shocked her. Her attention had been so focused on the drama, on discerning the council's motives and emotions. His physical interaction with her person took her by surprise. She resisted her instinctive urge to bat him away, to place distance between them. This moment would be scrutinized over and over. They must present a united front. She reached up and placed a hand over his on her shoulder, forcing herself to relax into him. He towered over her, speaking to the council over her head. "I am pleased to announce my engagement to Cadet Maral Lian of Phalosia, governor of Dalat Colony. Maral has agreed to be my mate and will shortly join the Malurian royal family as Dusar." Maral soaked in the heat generated by him against her back, surprisingly warm and reassuring as he continued. "The Malurian Empire takes a dim view of anyone that would attack or attempt to steal from members of our royal family. The Malurian military will protect our holdings and planets against all incursions." The council erupted into chaos. "How dare you! That is our planet!" Adam shouted them down, eventually restoring order. He glared at MakenRoy. "The Malurian Empire has a treaty with the Alliance. This is a serious breach." He spat on the floor before MakenRoy. "What happened to the vaunted Malurian honor?" MakenRoy shrugged arrogantly, unimpressed. "We breach no agreement. In Malurian law, the right to defend a mate's property overrides any other agreement." He smiled, showing a forest of sharp, red-tipped teeth. "You came begging to us for the treaty, not the other way around. There is a lovely human expression I have learned. You are a tiny fish in a huge pond." Adam spluttered, and MakenRoy held out a hand to Maral formally. "Come, lady, I think we are done here." Maral placed her hand in his, resisting the urge to cheer. She had to give the idiot credit. He had style. "Thank you, Ambassador." Nulium sneered at her. "So, you whore yourself now for an alliance, how typical." He sniggered at MakenRoy. "Better be careful she doesn't stab you in your sleep once she gets what she wants." MakenRoy laughed at him derisively. "Malurians are not scared of strong mates. Although I can't say that I'm surprised that any of your mates would try to stab you in your sleep, poor females." Amira cast one last contemptuous look at the council. "Whatever comes next, remember, you could have stopped this. Your greed, your lack of fidelity, caused this. We will not start a war, but we will defend ourselves." She cast one last look at Adam, Nulium, and Van Hoos, and threw an object on the floor before them. "Perhaps next time we meet you will have better leadership." They turned as one and marched out of the hall, leaving the dazed council in disarray behind them. MakenRoy paced behind Maral. Twice she tried to fall back into line with him, and both times he stayed a step behind her. Eventually he snarled at her. "Will you stop doing that?" "What?" she retorted. "Moving back. The group needs to stay together so that we can defend it." "I'm trying to," she spluttered. "I'm attempting to take rear guard position, but you keep getting in the way." He looked at her queerly. "You are my mate, Cadet. I will take rear guard position and defend you from danger." She rolled her eyes at him. "I am the military officer here, remember, Your Grace? Defending is my job." Before he could reply, Frey cut in. "Can you both cut it out for now? We are nearly at the last exit. If they attack anywhere, it'll be once we leave the council grounds. They won't want our blood on their pretty white marble. Outside will be fair game." "Fine," muttered Maral, feeling about 12 years old. Seriously, she was a seasoned commander of troops, had been for 30 or more years, and she was arguing like a cadet in a combat situation. She was letting the rock-headed male throw her off her game. Deciding to concede gracefully, she moved forward, letting MakenRoy take the rear guard. As she moved past him, he reached out and touched her arm. She leaped back with a hiss. Be still, mate, I have a question. He flicked a glance at Amira, striding at the front, and lowered his voice. What did she throw onto the floor? Maral scrubbed her hand through her hair. It was a cut hunio rope. We use the rope to mark alliances, bindings. The cut hunio says that the agreement is broken beyond repair. There is no hope of resolution. Chapter 6. Escape. His new mate was much smaller than he had realized. Her fierceness, her boldness and competence during their initial interactions had skewed his memories of her. When he had placed his hands on her shoulders, backing her up both metaphorically and physically against the Alliance Council, he had been thrown for a split second at how small she was. Her head barely came to his chest. The Alliance meeting had proceeded as he expected. From the moment they had walked into the room, the air had vibrated with the Council's collusion, their anticipation of a trap. He disapproved, both of their lack of honor and premature celebration. It was a poor hunter that celebrated before the prey was caught. That the prey they had intended to catch was his potential mate, well, it made them doubly stupid. No one harmed what was his. The only reason he hadn't murdered them all where they stood was that they didn't yet know that Maral was his mate, that they were threatening Malurian territory. The Verit and Phalosian females representing their people had done well. They had given the Council multiple opportunities to take action. MakenRoy was sure that they entered this drastic action with a clear conscience, having given peace a chance. Now, as he prowled the rear guard while they retreated, he considered his options. The Phalosian females were eyeing each other, and he was sure some non-vocal communication was occurring. When they exited the Alliance headquarters, they were brought up short by the Phalosian delegate, Amira. She bore the face of his mate, but he would never mistake them. Amira was entirely too cunning and manipulative for his comfort. In just a short time in Maral's company, he already knew that his mate was straight as an arrow. We must split up, Amira announced without preamble. I must return to Phalosia, to the Lakar, and prepare for war. The plans we have prepared against this contingency must be set in motion. A wing of Daggerkiss will be dispatched to Dalat colony immediately to provide support to the colonists. MakenRoy nodded. The Phalosian Daggerkiss were infamous soldiers, spies and murderers for a cause. Only the stupid crossed them. An entire wing of them would be a force of nature, capable of defending the planet until proper help could arrive. Frey nodded. I will return to Verit. We have prepared 3 clans of troops ready to send to Dalat. They should arrive within the week. Can your wing hold until then? They must. I will go to Dalat to prepare the colony, began Maral, but MakenRoy cut her off, ignoring her glare at him. We must go to Maluria first. If you wish our aid, this treaty must be ratified through our mating. We have a Malurian embassy on this planet, and a Malurian Dojun-class ship in orbit. It can have us in Maluria in a day. We can be mated and then leave for the colony with the advanced Malurian defense force within a few days. Maral clamped her mouth shut with a click. He could see her jaw working as she scowled at him. What about the treaty negotiations? They can be done remotely, interjected Amira. I have researched Malurian customs and only the mating need happen in person. I will send Lenora to you on Casti so that you have someone there to stand for you. You can't be serious, hissed Maral, grabbing her sister by the arm, staring daggers at her. You expect me just to go with him, to be mated, then pop over to Dalat to stop a war? Yes, responded Amira implacably. That is the mission you agreed to. Another long look passed between the sisters. Eventually Maral spoke through clenched teeth. Very well. Her golden gaze turned to MakenRoy and pinned him to the spot. Where is the embassy? Across town. His eyes met hers, and for a second he fancied he saw fear in them. It struck him that perhaps, despite her bluster and fury, she was nervous about their mating. Before he could probe further, he heard a noise. He spun around, sniffing the air, his adrenaline rising when he scented Svobodan troops. The time for discussion has passed. Our pursuers approach. He turned to her and gave her a final choice. Decide, Kadek. Do you come with me or not? She wavered. He could see it. Her resolve balanced on a knife's edge before her expression firmed. She clenched her jaw and raised her chin in defiance. I'm in. Lead on, Ambassador. He grinned, flashing his fangs. He appreciated her sass. She might be spikier than a bruja fruit, but she was strong. She would not break. You may call me Maku, it is my kin name. He grabbed her small hand in his. Time to go. He took off into a sprint, dragging her behind him to her annoyed squawk. He pulled her through the crowd of waiting petitioners and into the street, dodging hovercars and stalls selling food and drinks to milling Alliance command staff. After her initial startled outburst, she was silent. He raced along, his blood raging with battle. Now was not the time. He had his new mate to protect and an alliance to seal. Once they were out of the immediate Alliance command area, he slowed his speed to a pace comfortable for her, as he felt her lengthen her stride to keep up with him, falling into a steady run. He let her wrist go and he led them through the maze of office blocks that made up the headquarters city centre. They arrived at the transport hub, his heart racing. He pulled Maral to a stop, ducking between two rusted storage containers before he spoke. "We will hire a hover vehicle to take us to the embassy." Maral's eyes spat fire at him. "Praise the goddess, it appears you have regained the power of speech. How kind of you to deign to tell me our plan, rather than just grabbing me and towing me along." He recoiled in surprise at her manner. "I didn't grab you. I made a strategic withdrawal. There was no time to discuss strategy." Maral glared at him and raised her wrist, showing the circle of bruises already darkening there. "You didn't grab me!" MakenRoy was stunned. He gently took her hand, turning it to examine the damage. I didn't know that you were damaged." How could Phalosians be so fragile? How could he possibly mate with her? "Why did you not say?" Maral straightened, jerking her hand from his grasp. "I can tell you right now, this is not how our mating will be. You will not grab me, drag me all over the city without a word. Worse, when I point out that you have injured me, you try to make it my fault for not saying something." She held herself poker straight, icily furious. "The words you're looking for, Ambassador, are I'm sorry." He met her gaze and swallowed at the anger he saw there. He bowed his head. "I'm sorry." He did not harm females, but twice in a few days he had marked this female, the female that was meant to be his mate, no less. It was inexcusable. She froze for a moment before stepping back, clearly trying to put what space she could between them, given their small hiding spot. "There, that wasn't so hard, was it?" She briskly tugged the cuff on her uniform down to hide the injury. "Your apology is accepted. My jumpsuit will repair the damaged tissue shortly. However, in the future, you had best remember that I am a cadet. I have led troops for decades, planned hundreds of battles." She peered around the edge of the container towards the transport hub, examining the vendors. "If you had discussed strategy with me for a moment, I would have told you that this is a poor plan. This is a logical place for us to go, therefore they will likely have an ambush waiting. We would have been better off stealing a vehicle." Her tone set his teeth on edge. "I am an ambassador. I have diplomatic immunity." Maral rolled her eyes. "Really? Then why did we just flee from Alliance command? You know as well as I do that your immunity means nothing here. You just told them that our alliance will take precedence over your existing arrangements. They will not feel bound to honour the agreement." He conceded that she may have a point. He had felt the malicious intent from the council. His only thought had been to get himself and his new mate out of the firing line. "How far away is your embassy?" "The other side of the city. At least a day's walk." She turned back to him, cocking her head. "Can't you call your people to fetch you? Why do we need to obtain a vehicle at all?" MakenRoy hesitated. "They can track our comms, they'll find us." Maral's eyes grew huge. "You let them track your comms? What happened to your vaunted Malurian spy expertise?" He shrugged defensively. "It's useful. When we know they are listening, we can control what they think we know." "I see." Her tone told him that she did indeed see, and she didn't like what she saw. Clearly she thought his people were imbeciles. They locked eyes as they pondered options. Finally, MakenRoy spoke. "I still think it's worth the try hiring a vehicle. We could be there within the hour." "All right. What weapons do you have on you?" MakenRoy winced again in embarrassment. For a Malurian warrior, he was not exactly showing his best traits to his new mate. "Just my knives. It's frowned on for ambassadors to wander around fully armed. It implies a lack of trust in the host nation." "I see," Maral said again. Her tone was caustic, and he saw her fight the battle with herself not to say what she was so clearly thinking. "Well, I have a pulse pistol. That means I'm cover and you're bait. Hire the vehicle, I'll stay here and cover you. You can swing by and pick me up if it works out." Maral stepped aside and motioned for him to precede her. Deciding that the only option was to comply with grace, he stepped out into the flow of people, approaching the hover hire vendor. It was small, just a stall with a young Danute running it, and a line of waiting vehicles parked. The Danute brightened when it saw him approach. "Welcome, sir. What can we help you with today?" It spoke in a sing-song voice, its green skin warming to yellow in welcome. "Thank you for your welcome," he replied formally. "I would like to hire a 2-person hover vehicle." He pointed to a display image of a small Silver City cab floating above the counter. "Certainly. Please scan your ID and credit chip here." The Danute held out a datapad to him. He waved his palm over the indicator, and the pad flashed red. The Danute looked down at it, horror on its expression. It looked up at MakenRoy, dropped the pad, and darted off in the opposite direction, its vestigial wings fluttering to give it added speed. A siren blared, and the patrons at the transport hub scattered. An automated voice alert sounded over the public speakers. "This is a Level Alpha security alert. All patrons evacuate. Security personnel are en route." He sighed. He would never hear the end of this. He didn't know Maral well, but he already knew that this would be discussed for years to come, possibly decades. Well, they knew where they were. No need for secrecy anymore. He activated his wristcom and spoke into it. "This is Dusin MakenRoy, en route to the embassy. Svobodan and Alliance soldiers in pursuit. Send a security team to collect me. Lock in on my signal." "Confirmed, Ambassador. Security personnel will be with you in half an hour." Maral came towards him, valiantly not commenting on the alarms. "So we run. We run. My people are coming. They will find us. We need to find a secure position to defend for half an hour." Maral considered, looking around the now deserted hub. "There," she pointed to a large building across the open airstrip. "That is a secure transport facility for high-end cargo. They will have shields, likely weapons for their security team." It was across an open area, the space airstrip. There was no cover. If they weren't fast enough, there would be nowhere to hide. As they ran, MakenRoy felt his skin crawl, sure they would be shot in the back at any moment. Mercifully, they reached the building without issue. They crept around the side, Maral with her pulse rifle up, until they reached the staff entrance. He brute-forced the door, and they found themselves in a utility corridor. They trotted past doors labelled as staff rooms, toilet facilities and storage, until they reached one marked as security. Maral motioned for him to stop, and she pressed her palm to the door. He waited, watching as her eyes unfocused, indicating that she was using her empathic senses. It fascinated him, so unlike the Malurian rudimentary telepathic shields. It was a useful skill for a mate to have. Perhaps she would pass it on to their young. They could start a new genome of Malurian with empathic skills. After a long moment, she refocused and nodded at him. "It's empty. They must have cleared out already." They entered the room and stopped, stunned. Maral whistled appreciatively. The high-tech command center was laid out before them in a semicircle, floating displays with visual feeds showing the entrances and exits. Beyond the command area were cages filled with an array of weapons. "Jackpot," she whispered. "Can you work this system?" He grinned in delight. "My AI and I can work any system." "Right then. You bring up the shields and secure us. I'll grab some weapons." Chapter 7. Siege and Rescue. Maral left MakenRoy to connect his AI to the system while she grabbed their weapons. She discarded her uniform jacket and pulse pistol, leaving herself in her blue Phalosian military jumpsuit. It contained a sophisticated AI that monitored her health, could administer basic first aid, and had basic shield capabilities and several other useful systems. Over it, she strapped a lightweight armoured vest and a storage web covered in pouches. Into the pouches she loaded several types of bombs, several pulse and laser pistols, and 2 knives. She also strapped a large laser knife to her leg. Last, she acquired a Wumpa pulse rifle. They weren't practical for long-range use, being rather bulky and heavy, but for this situation it would suffice. She grabbed several other items for MakenRoy and returned to the command station. "Report." He glanced at the weaponry appreciatively and began strapping his own armour on as he spoke. "Shields are up. They are not sophisticated but will suffice for a short time. I have initialized mag locks on all the doors and set the system to continuous scanning for threats." He checked the time on his wrist device. 25 minutes until extraction. The silence drew out between them. After the action of the day, the unexpected lull was awkward. Maral felt him looking at her admiringly, bristling with weapons. His approbation was unhidden. Clearly he liked a warrior. It was unsettling, all happening too soon and too fast. While she had accepted this mission, she steadfastly refused to consider any of the physical or emotional aspects of the mating until things were more settled with Dalat. "Tell me about yourself," Maral said. "I know nothing about you. If we are going to be mated, we should probably get better acquainted." "Now?" he asked her incredulously. "Got anything better to do? We've got time to kill." He laughed. "Such an odd human concept. Time is a gift, we do not kill it. Still, as you say, we have nothing else pressing until someone shows up to shoot us." He sat down in one of the chairs and stretched his long legs out. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," was her immediate response. "If I must be a Malurian mate, I must have all the necessary intelligence." "You make it sound like a mission," she shrugged. "It is." Ah. Maral had the oddest feeling that she had hurt him somehow. "Perhaps I should start with Malurian family culture. It is our core. Family, both chosen and blood, is everything to a Malurian. We have the duty and honor of caring for those in our family. We will move mountains to do something for our family." "Tell me about your family," he shrugged. "I am blood royal. My uncle is the current emperor. We have a large extended family. There are nearly 200 of us." 200! Maral was astounded, could barely comprehend the numbers. "Felosia's birth rate has been declining for years. I cannot imagine a family so large. It is a joy. They are loud and somewhat interfering." His voice was laced with affection. "You met my Aunt Marvi, Dusar Mavansal. She handles our alliances and negotiations and keeps track of our nets of obligations. Through alliances we are joined to many other families, clans and species. Malurians exist in a web of family, both supported and obligated by it. The majority of my family works for the Empire in some manner." "Will your sons?" he laughed. "Yes, and Goddess help the Empire. My sons have much of Ruya, my last mate, in them. She was gentle and sweet, but disinclined to follow orders, and often went her own way if her heart demanded it. To her credit, she was usually right, but it caused many sleepless nights for the Emperor." His eyes brightened as he spoke of his sons, and her heart went out to him as she caught the echo of his ache for them. "I'm sorry for keeping you from your sons. While I haven't lost a mate, losing my daughter was devastating. I'm grateful that Varys is with us, that I have that small connection to her, as you have with your sons, reminiscent of their mother. It has been difficult for me to be away from Varys, as I'm sure it has been for your sons." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "Ruya and I's mating was political. She was from a well-connected family that my family needed an alliance with. It is common on Maluria. Marvi had hoped that we would grow to care for each other, but we were very different people. She was a scientist and spent much of her time in her labs. We shared the joy of our sons, though. She was an excellent mother." He shook his head, visibly pulling himself back from his memories. "Did you have a mate before?" "Who was your daughter's sire?" "No, I've never mated. I met a male that was happy to be a donor and raised my Liara myself. I've spent most of my life travelling in the military. There was little time for mating. As I became more senior, most of the males I met were my subordinates." She smiled sadly at him, her anxiety about this turn of events in her life a gnawing pit in her stomach. "This is an adventure I had never thought to take." He looked horrified. "You have no family. You raised your daughter by yourself." Maral huffed in indignation. "Of course not. I had my sister, my mother, my friends, my unit. Solo parenting is the norm on Felosia, and our communities are tightly knit. We support each other." His expression was so outraged that Maral cackled. "You will need to learn my culture as much as I need to learn yours, Ambassador. My daughter ran wild on the station I commanded, the 50 females in my unit, honorary aunts and sisters as required." He met her gaze, something unreadable in his expression. "I've asked already. Please call me Maku. As my intended mate, you may use my kin name." Maral cocked her head. "I will consider it. It seems overly familiar. We barely know each other." "We will in time. If you do not use it, the other Malurian will think you have broken our arrangement. It would not be perceived well. Mates, those we are close to, use our kin name." Maral nodded. "Very well. Felosians are much more formal, except with those closest to us. Our empathy leaves us open to bombardment by the emotional currents of others, unless we shield constantly. Culturally, we lean towards clear and firm boundaries." She sighed, scrubbing her face with the heels of her hands. "Nevertheless, I'll do my best to adapt. This is new for both of us. You and your family may call me Maral." He bowed his head briefly. "Thank you. Maral." Maral had to admit she was surprised. Look at them, sitting having a civil conversation. She hadn't called him an idiot in her mind for several minutes. Score 1 for relationship development. "Tell me about your life in the military. Where were you?" Their conversation was cut off by the blaring of the perimeter alarms. On the display screens, troops were amassing on the airfield. "Shit, I guess whoever is in command isn't a complete imbecile after all," muttered Maral. "How long until extraction?" "At least 15 minutes, came the terse reply, his jaw clenched. "Can we hold?" "I think so." The shields dropped. "Shit!" MakenRoy's hands danced over the controls, and within moments the shields were up again. "What happened? Did anyone get through?" demanded Maral. MakenRoy reviewed the scans intently, his eyes glued to the shimmering screens. "Scanning now." "No." "What happened?" "They must have contacted the owners of the facility and got the codes to the shields to deactivate them. I've reset the codes and scrambled the interface, only I can drop them again." Maral frowned, studying the troops outside. They certainly didn't look like they were unhappy that their plan had been foiled. She stretched her senses to the maximum and felt faint hints of satisfaction. "Are you sure nothing got in? They don't feel like troops with a failed plan." "This is Alliance security. Drop your shields and surrender." A male voice crackled through an open comm channel. "You have 2 minutes before we initiate offensive measures." "You're right, they are too smug. What offensive measures could they have that can get through the shields? They were down for 2.1 seconds. Maral reached out and gripped his arm urgently. "A device of some kind. If they shot it inside the shield perimeter, the second it went down, they could have managed to get a bomb or disruptor inside." She spun back to the displays. "Quickly, we're running out of time. Scan the 2 seconds the shields were down. Did anything enter, no matter how small? Scans often filter out small detections to avoid constant false positives from insects and birds." It took barely a second. "There, side entrance. A small piece of metal entered at low altitude and at low speed when the shields were down and inserted itself into the air vent. Right now, it's near the central power core for the building." "I've got it. Send me the map." Maral didn't wait for his reply. She raced out of the room, the map appearing on her HUD seconds later. Alongside it, a small timer showed 1 minute, 30 seconds, the time remaining until the ultimatum expired. She ran down the utility corridors until she reached the power core room. Maral entered cautiously, costing herself precious seconds. The room was dark and roaring with noise from the machinery. Meticulously, she searched the room for the device, acutely aware of the reducing timer. There! She spotted the device. It was stuck to the central power controller part way up. It was small, barely the length of a finger, and a dull, burnished metal. Extending from the metal were hundreds of light filaments permeating the power core. She scanned it with her HUD and sucked in a breath. "It's a micro-bomb. It will disrupt the power core and cause an overload," she whispered into her HUD. "It'll blow the entire facility." "Can you disarm it?" MakenRoy was a calm, soft rumble in her ear. His matter-of-fact reply steadied her. "No," she was certain of that. "But I can destroy it. These devices are prone to overload. However, to do that, I need to hit it with a pulse rifle shot, which will most likely render the power core offline as well. The shields will drop without the core." MakenRoy was silent while he considered it. "We have no choice. Either we take down the shields or they take out the whole facility. They don't know that we know about their device. It gives us an advantage." "Agreed. Let's use our last minute wisely. I'm en route to the front entrance foyer. I will place my smaller bombs and take a sniper position. Even without the shields, this building is highly defensible." "Confirmed. I will do the same at the rear cargo entrance once I blow the device. Let me know when you're in position." Maral waited. Trickles of sweat ran down her neck. She always hated this bit of war, the waiting, the not knowing what her teammates were doing, whether they were alive or dead. 15 seconds left on the clock. "I'm in position. Do it." She took aim and shot the little device. As expected, both the device and power core immediately darkened offline. She sprinted for the rear entrance and set her bombs in the large cargo doorways before finding a spot on the roof of a supervisor's office overlooking the dock. It gave her a decent 180-degree view to pick off soldiers as they entered. "In position," she confirmed. They waited again. She extended her senses, detecting confusion and anger in the soldiers outside. Clearly they were less happy with the turn of events this time. "So sorry, we didn't blow up as planned. Guess you'll have to do some actual work now. Tell me, Maral, is your life always this exciting? In the few weeks I've known you, I have been kidnapped, entered a galactic alliance, broken a second galactic alliance and been chased across town by alliance security." She barked a laugh. "Yup, it's non-stop excitement around here. Better get used to it, buddy." He laughed quietly in her ear. "I find it appealing. Maluriens are not made for peace. We crave action, challenge." "Are you saying I'm challenging?" She took mock offense. "Am I actually flirting with him? I would never, honored mate. Living with you will keep me from getting slow in my dotage." She cackled that time. "Your dotage? How long do Maluriens live?" "Perhaps another 300 years, unless I am killed in the line of duty." She felt a pang at that. "You should not tempt the goddess so. I've lost enough friends to battle." He was silent, and she wondered if she had offended him. She didn't even know if Maluriens had a deity structure. When he next spoke, his voice was clipped, hard. "They are moving around to the rear entrance. Confirmed, I'm ready. I cannot join you. They are mounting a frontal assault as well." "Noted, I've got this." Another hesitation. "Are you certain?" Fury ignited. "MakenRoy, let's set some ground rules now. You do not ever question my competence in the field. I was born and trained for this." He huffed. "I would never." "You just did." She was implacable. If their mating was to have any chance of success, this was a line that needed to be drawn right now. He softened, his voice conciliatory. "You must understand. It is against my nature for my mate to be in danger when I cannot be at her side. I take my duty in this matter seriously. I am a cadet. It is against my nature to be protected. Your duty will never take precedence over my independence and freedom." Maral was absolutely serious. This she would never compromise on. A mating where she was not free would destroy her. "We can discuss this later. I'm about to be attacked." She pushed all thought of their mating aside. She didn't need the distraction while she was fighting. Two shadows approached the side door on the far right of the cargo bay. Her position was perfect. They crept in, running from shadow to shadow, staying low to the ground. She considered her strategy. While it was tempting to simply shoot them, what she needed most was time. She couldn't let them leave the cargo bay, or they'd creep up on MakenRoy from behind, but she was more than happy to let them run themselves around in here. Minutes crept by as she waited, cool and calm, in her element. Another two silhouettes appeared by the doors on the left of the cargo bay, just below her perch above the supervisor's office. They approached the two already inside, and with a couple of hand motions, one directed the others to move into the tunnels towards MakenRoy. That was quite enough of that. She took aim, and in a series of precise shots, took out all four cleanly. "4 down in the cargo bay," she reported. "There is a larger troop unit massing outside the cargo bay doors. They are preparing to rush you." "Noted." She stood up and sprinted along the roof of the supervisor's hut and swung herself up into the rafters in a single smooth motion. She crawled along a rafter until she hit an air vent and gently removed the seal before climbing in and pulling it back to cover her location. Below her, she heard small charges go off in a series of firecracker pops before the huge cargo doors crashed to the ground in a screech of metal. The dock filled with troops pouring through the gaping hole in the wall, dark shadows in the dust cloud, their laser sights illuminating the particles suspended in the air. She let them come, let them stream towards the corridors leading deeper into the facility, then set off her own charges. She had dropped them at various places around the hold, mostly near the corridors. There hadn't been time for strategic placement calculations, so she simply crossed her fingers and gave the command. The results were dramatic, to say the least. The interior corridors crumpled, crushing some of the troops beneath them and effectively sealing them off. Her second set of bombs activated, sonics this time, and the audio waves flowed out in a circle from each bomb. The impact rendered anyone they touched unconscious immediately. Perfect. Maral squirmed back in the air vent until she reached a junction, then crawled off in the direction of the front of the building. Rear entrance sealed for now, troops neutralized. They only have the front entrance as an option now. Heading your way. There was no response and her heart dropped. "MakenRoy, come in." Maral activated her HUD, bringing up the maze of air vents, and crawled off in the right direction. As expected, the vents were filthy, littered with insects and the occasional dead small creature. She dragged herself along the tight passageway, scraping her elbows and cursing when her hair snagged. She wrenched herself free, grateful that her hair was so short, and scrambled on until she was over the main entrance hall. She peered through the air vent into the reception area of the building, feeling with her empathic senses. She found MakenRoy straight away, hiding behind an overturned metal-plated reception desk at the far end. The Alliance soldiers were clustered around the open main entrance doors and a huge hole in the wall to her left. In between was an assortment of furniture and office equipment in disarray. "I have diplomatic immunity. This is an illegal attack. You risk war with my people." MakenRoy's voice was low and rumbling, matter-of-fact. His ambassador persona was long gone. This was the warrior, vicious and dangerous. Maral could feel the violent energy emanating from him from her position high above. "You are evading Alliance security and have entered this property illegally," the guard responded hotly. "Undertaking illegal actions violates the treaty and negates your diplomatic immunity. We're here to arrest you. Any further resistance will be taken as an act of aggression by your people." Clearly the guard was from the shallow end of the gene pool. No sentient being in its right mind would hear MakenRoy speak and still antagonize him further. "Do you understand the meaning of diplomatic immunity? It's illegal to arrest me. I took refuge here after the Alliance red-flagged my ID when I was peacefully trying to hire a vehicle. The Alliance issued the first act of aggression by red-flagging me." "That is irrelevant. You are required to follow the instructions of Alliance security. Come out now, or we will come in and get you, and we cannot promise you will remain unharmed. Our second party is even now assaulting the rear entrance. We will have the Philosian bitch momentarily. If you surrender now, we will try to make sure she is unharmed." The temperature dropped in the room. Within seconds she could see little puffs of breath from the Alliance soldiers. The next time MakenRoy spoke, his voice was a hiss of anger. "Be careful who you threaten, officer. If you speak of my mate with disrespect again, it will be the last thing you say. My people have a treaty with yours because it amuses us. An attack on an ambassador or their mate is an act of war, and you really don't want to meet me on the battlefield." The officer laughed. "Word is you already broke the treaty. I always wanted to take on a Malurian. Last chance, ambassador. Come out or we come in." "We have broken no treaty. If you do this thing, the consequences are on your head." The Alliance security officer barked his orders. "Force authorized. Secure the ambassador." The security personnel streamed in from two sides in a classic pincer movement. As Maral watched, the temperature in the room dropped even lower, frost creeping over the windows and metal surfaces. She had no idea what it was. In all her years in the military, she'd seen nothing like it. They clambered over and around the displaced equipment. MakenRoy didn't wait for them to reach him. He erupted out of his hiding place, his long coat flaring behind him as he leaped. He swiped his claws across the nearest soldier before swinging the unfortunate male in front of him as a body shield. He ran headlong into the nearest cohort and threw their comrade's body directly at them, and they went down in a tangle of limbs. The second group that had been creeping up from the other side took a split second to react, and it was a second too long. MakenRoy pointed his pulse rifle at them and began rapid firing as he raced to his next hiding spot, behind a series of display stands. The guards' pained curses filled the air, although Maral noted no one seemed to be dead yet. Even the unfortunate body shield was groaning in pain, but looked like he'd survive if he got medical aid soon. The ambassador was taking great care not to cause an intergalactic incident by murdering the entire security force. It was an incredible display of skill and control. Movement caught Maral's eye, and she noticed a dark-clad individual creeping up behind MakenRoy. MakenRoy hadn't seen the creeper yet, and the individual had clearly observed their comrade's fate and was keen not to repeat it. Maral considered her options. If she opened the vent, she'd be a target, and she couldn't shoot through the vent. She also couldn't just sit here while her future mate was shot or captured. Annoying as he was, she needed him and the Maluriens too much. She sighed. Nothing was ever easy. She tried one more time to raise MakenRoy on the comms. "Come in, ambassador." She waited. Nothing. Fine, time for the hard way. She reached out with her mind and examined him. His awareness was tightly coiled and focused, as expected during a battle. His inner thoughts were securely encased in a hard shell, unlike anything she'd ever seen before. It seemed to shift, with hints of colour moving within, but nothing leaked out. Still, she didn't need his inner thoughts. All she needed was to connect to the surface level. "MakenRoy, can you hear me?" She felt him recoil, then instant relief. "Maral, you are alive. I damaged my comms, couldn't track you. I am unharmed. You also have a sniper appearing on your left. I've got him." MakenRoy didn't move, didn't stop firing, didn't indicate that he had noticed the shooter. She had to admit he was impressive and cool as ice. In fact, it was absolutely freezing in the room now. "Did you secure the rear entrance?" "I did." "Then I came here to save your butt." She felt him pause at her comment. "My butt? Why my butt?" She nearly laughed out loud and broke her cover. "It's just an expression. Besides, why not your butt? It's a good butt." Was she actually flirting during combat? The weirdness of the past few days must have addled her mind. She felt his laughter and a flash of something darker, hotter, but it was gone before she could properly look at it. "My butt thanks you. Now you must disconnect and shield. The next bit may be uncomfortable for you. I'm out of ammo and down to my knives. I need to take more aggressive action." Acknowledged. She disconnected, curious. Her attention split between MakenRoy and the sniper. MakenRoy waited until the last second before he acted. He dropped his empty guns and grabbed the knives strapped to his legs. He threw them one after another in rapid succession, taking out the last of the Alliance soldiers inside the reception area. Seeing him exposed and unarmed, the sniper tensed to shoot, and MakenRoy dove forward, spinning around to face the sniper as he did. He raised his palms and the air between himself and the sniper wavered like a mirage. The sniper screamed, a short, sharp wail of agony, as it batted at its face before falling silent. Just like that, it was quiet. Maral had no idea what had happened. She pushed her senses out, finding no Alliance soldiers within the building. Even those at the rear entrance had left. Odd. Maral wiggled back until the air shaft opened up enough for her to twist around to put her feet against the vent grate. She kicked it out and crawled out into the carnage. All around her were the dying soldiers and broken wreckage of the once pristine reception area. What a waste of life. All for nothing. She stomped over to MakenRoy, who was still on the ground, wheezing. As she did, she sloshed through a puddle. Wait, what? Where had the puddle come from? "Are you injured?" she asked as she offered him her hand to get up. He accepted, and she hauled him upright, staggering under his weight. He could barely stand and leaned heavily on her. "No, just exhausted," he mumbled. "What happened?" "Used inner fire. It's fine, just takes a lot." "What's inner fire?" "I absorbed the heat in the atmosphere, then redirected it at the target." "Huh," thought Maral. "Fancy." He gave her a ghost of a smile. "It wipes me out. Can only do it once." MakenRoy cocked his head, listening. "A group of personnel approaches." Maral guided/half-dragged him over to a corner and leaned him into the crevice, stepping in front of him to defend him. "Don't worry, I've got this!" The new group streamed in through the hole in the wall, guns raised, and surrounded them. They were covered head to toe in black armor, including masks. Not even their eyes were visible. Maral planted her feet and raised her remaining 2 pulse pistols. In her most formal K-Deck voice, she coldly instructed the arrivals. "Stay back or we will defend ourselves. This is Ambassador MakenRoy, and he has diplomatic immunity. Any attempted harm will be viewed as an act of aggression." The group was silent until their leader laughed. It was high and tinkling, and Maral realized she was female. She pulled off her helmet and mask to reveal the dark grey skin and red eyes of a Malurian. "Cousin, is your new mate defending you while you take a nap in the corner? You'll never hear the end of this. We will tell this story at your funeral wake." The other soldiers laughed, relaxing. Maral didn't lower her gun. "Cousin?" she inquired, and she heard MakenRoy sigh. "Yes, unfortunately. Siru here is my cousin, daughter of my sire's brother." He placed a hand on Maral's shoulder and levered himself upright. She kept her knees from buckling by sheer force of will. "Siru, meet Cadet Maral Lien of the Phalosian military, governor of Dalat colony and my future mate." Maral was astonished to hear the trace of pride in his voice when he spoke of her. Siru met her eyes, and Maral realized she wasn't the only one to hear the pride. "Maral, this is Siru Tua, commander of the Malurian Embassy Security Detachment on this planet. Come to rescue us." Siru looked at the surrounding destruction. "Clearly you didn't need my help." Maral shrugged. "This was all MakenRoy." "And the cargo entrance?" Maral shrugged again. "That was me." "I see." Siru looked her over again and grunted. "Well then, cousin, let's get you home. You look like you need a nap. We'll comms the Alliance to come and collect their wounded. We are abandoning the Alliance embassy." Chapter 8. Detailed Negotiations. Maral and MakenRoy were bundled into an armoured hover vehicle and raced back to the embassy, where they were promptly hustled into a Dojin-class express flyer. Maral stood in the centre of a tiny cabin, trying to process how quickly things had spiralled out of control. In the space of an hour, they had gone from presenting to the Alliance to a battlefield, to a dark, warm cabin on the high-speed flyer, on the way to an alien planet where she would be mated. It was surreal. These things just didn't happen in real life like this. Even other battles she had been in were carefully planned, months of detailed, painstaking work. Not this rushed, headlong dive into chaos. She looked at the mound on the bed where MakenRoy lay. Then there was him. What the hell was she to do with him? Most of the time he irritated the hell out of her. He was manipulative, high-handed and arrogant. When he didn't get what he wanted, he shut down. It was infuriating. Mating him would be an exercise in frustration. But then there was his unexpected kindness. His respect for her, her skills and abilities, like when he had threatened the Alliance officer when he disrespected her. MakenRoy hadn't been aware that she was there, hiding in the vent. He hadn't been performing for her. He'd meant every word. Even in her absence, he defended her. She had always been attracted to strength, and he had that in spades. Honour, too, more than most. Perhaps this could work somehow. "You're thinking too hard," he mumbled from under the covers. "Excuse me, Ambassador, but I'm the empath here. You can't hear me thinking." He snorted. "All males can hear females thinking too hard. It's a gender-specific survival mechanism." She laughed and padded over to him and peered down, trying to discern his face in the dim light. "How are you feeling? Can I get you anything?" "Perhaps if you can make it warmer. Maluriens are hot-blooded and high temperatures are important for recovery time." "Of course, Ambassador. Anything else?" His voice deepened. "I have asked that you call me Maku, and I told you I wasn't ready for that yet," she snapped, instantly regretting her harsh tone. "However, after our first battle, I think I can bend enough to call you MakenRoy." He chuckled darkly. "I'll take what I can get. You drive a hard bargain, Cadet." "Maral," he chuckled again, devolving into a hacking cough. "Don't make me laugh. I feel like I've been run over." Maral padded over to the control panel on the wall and prodded at it. Unsurprisingly, it was in Malurian. She connected her HUD to it to translate and worked out the thermostat. "It's not too warm for you?" MakenRoy asked. "No, Pholosia is tropical. I like heat." Any chance she had to go home to Pholosia, she had spent lying on the black sand beaches soaking in the sun and heat. "That's good. Maluria is geologically active. As a result, we live in cities warmed by the subsurface activity. We like it warm." Maral padded back to the bed and perched on the edge. "What happens next?" "Well, it's a day or so back to Maluria. We will meet the Emperor, who will ratify our mating, and there will be a ceremony. My family will want to celebrate." "Even for a political marriage?" She saw a glint of his fangs in the dim light. "Especially. What better way to convey to your enemies that the match is embraced and supported? The celebration will also buy us time to pull together an initial defense force to fly back to Dalat with us." "All right. Is there anything I should know about your traditions?" He sighed. "Many things. I will do my best to give you a, what do you call it, crash course. But no one will expect you to know it all. They know you are not Malurian. That you came to our planet and performed our ceremony will suffice for now." Maral paused, trying to phrase her question delicately. "What about after?" "After?" She nudged him irritably. "You know what I mean. Us, our mating." MakenRoy sighed and patted the covers until he found her knee, which he squeezed. "We will work it out. We haven't done too badly so far. I think we will find we are not so badly matched." She cocked her head at him. "You think so?" He squeezed again, his big palm warm against her thigh. "I have always admired strength, and you are most formidable and effective." Another flash of his fangs in the dimness. "I am not Svobodan to fear your intelligence or skill. I will enjoy being your mate, I think." Maral felt his emotional retreat. "However, I understand you may not feel the same. I will give you time." Maral pondered her response. If she was going to give this mating a chance, it would take deliberate steps, a conscious choice on both their parts to make space for each other. MakenRoy had already made the first one. She placed her hand over his. "I am glad to hear that. For my part, I also admire strength and humour, which I am shocked to find that you have. Who knew Malurians could joke?" They shared a laugh. "We will make this work because we must. At least we both understand duty. Matings have been built on worse, plus your butt's not bad. She patted his hand and stepped back from the bed. Although I need you to move over a smidgen. His breath caught and she rolled her eyes. Don't get excited. I will not ambush you and steal your virtue. We have been assigned this shared cabin and you are in the only bed. Now that I'm coming off of the adrenaline from the battle, I need to sleep as well. Now budge over. He scooted to the side and she climbed into the bed beside him, dragging the covers over. She sighed heavily in the darkness. This is not where I thought my life was going, but it's certainly an adventure. When Maral woke later that day, she was wrapped in warmth. She was pressed against a hot water bottle, snuggled in heavy blankets. For a few seconds it was bliss. Then the hot water bottle moved and it threw her. All of a sudden her memories came rushing back. The battle, the flight, the conversation in the dimness of the cabin. She was pressed up against MakenRoy, legs wrapped around him like a climbing vine. Her skin prickled in awareness and she opened her eyes to see him awake, looking at her. He was so close. She felt his breath against her cheek. This is a welcome morning gift. I could get used to this. He reached out a sharp, clawed hand to stroke her cheek when she jerked away, mortified. The closeness, the gentle flirting, the affectionate intimacy they had conjured last night was gone. She was alone, in bed with an alien male. He was entirely too big, too much in her space. My apologies, Ambus. She saw his expression tighten and swallowed her words. MakenRoy. Maral pulled herself together and slipped out of the bed, wincing as she cracked from the unaccustomed sleeping position. She checked her HUD, and it informed her they had slept overnight and into the next morning. Time to their destination was approximately 12 hours. No apologies necessary. Like I said, your presence is welcome. When we are mated, we will share our bodies. It is best to become used to the concept. Maral turned and raised her eyebrow at him, needled by his arrogant presumption. You seem very sure that we will share our bodies. MakenRoy cocked his head at her. You confirmed your appetite for young during the negotiations. That will require a level of intimacy. Besides, you do not seem opposed to me physically. As I recall, you particularly like my rear. Maral bristled at the entitlement in his tone. That was last night. The high of the battle had clearly compromised my judgment. As for offspring, medical intervention is always possible. MakenRoy was shocked. You expect me to be celibate for the next 200 years? He pushed the covers down his torso and stretched, displaying a hard physique. No gym-crafted musculature there, just solid, lean muscles that came from years of martial arts training. He was huge, both tall and wide. She realized how much his standard ambassadorial robes had been selected to downplay his build. Looking at him now, there was no doubt in her mind that he was a lethal warrior. His skin was ridged with cartilage protrusions which appeared to be an organic armor. At his shoulders, elbows, hands, and around his neck and head, there were sharp black horns. Overnight, his talons had grown into lethal knives. It dawned on her that he must trim them daily. Maral flushed. Okay, he was absolutely gorgeous, like a blade, sharp and deadly. But she was clear-sighted enough to see his dominance, his need to control. She could never allow him to take control of the physical dynamic between them. As both a Philosian and a woman, her boundaries were her own, to set and move as she saw fit. His haughty expression, the hot look in his eyes, told her he knew exactly what he was doing when he displayed himself to her. How many females had fallen for that move? Maral consciously relaxed her shoulders and placed a hand on her hip, her gaze blatantly tracing his exposed torso. Her answering smile was slow, wide, and wicked. Perhaps we will enjoy each other, or perhaps we can seek whatever pleasure we wish elsewhere, should we come to an agreement between us. MakenRoy surged out of the bed and grabbed her shoulders, all teasing gone from him. Hear me, Cadet. This is not the Malurian way. We are loyal to our mates. There will be no seeking of pleasure with others once we are bonded. I will do everything in my power to make this a pleasurable experience for you. His gaze fixed on her lips as he spoke, then travelled down her body blatantly. You will not find my performance deficient, I assure you. He breathed against her neck, dragging a fang down her throat. He tipped her head back to look up at him. This is an important issue. If you are not willing to share your body, then contact your people and have them put forth another. I will not bind myself to someone that does not want me, in all ways. There was a ghost of pain in his eyes, something unsaid, but she couldn't be distracted by it. This issue was too important. She wrenched herself away and put as much distance as possible between them in the small cabin. "Have a care how you touch me, Ambassador. I will not be forced or coerced. Consent given can be withdrawn." "Forced?" MakenRoy was aghast, his shoulders stiffened with affront. "I do not force anyone. My goal is pleasure and companionship for us both. This will be torture for us if we cannot be intimate with each other. Be sure you know what you are signing up for. I will never force you. I will wait until you are ready, but you need to know that this is something that I want and need in my mate. You have a right to refuse the mating." His brows furrowed. "Just as I have a right to refuse to bind myself to a female that does not meet my needs." They glared at each other. Maral took a deep breath, consciously stepping back from her fury. She had agreed to see this mission through, and despite his arrogance, he was not wrong. He had the right to state what he wanted from their relationship, just as she did. She donned her Kadek mask, the manner that had cowed young officers for decades. "I accepted this assignment, Ambassador. I will see it through, but in my own time. I will not be rushed or forced. If I choose to be intimate, it will be on my terms." His eyes drilled into her before he nodded sharply. "Very well." He jerked his chin at a hatch nearby. "Those are the wash facilities. You can go first. I will see if the crew has left any clothing for us. After, we can introduce you to Malurian food in the garden." Without a further word, he stomped to the main entrance of the cabin and out into the corridor, wearing only his sleep shorts. At least it was a nice butt. All righty then, that went well. When Maral emerged from the sonic shower, there was a sharp rap on the door. She wrapped a towel around herself for modesty and opened the hatch a fraction. MakenRoy thrust a pile of clothing at her, obscuring her vision. "Clothing. There should be something that fits in there." A pause. "One of the officers has young on board nearly your size." He seemed to want to say more, but shook his head. As soon as she gripped the bundle, he turned and marched off down the corridor. "Thank you," she called down the corridor before closing the hatch. The first item of clothing was a jumpsuit in a dark red, close to black. It was unsurprising. Most advanced species gravitated to jumpsuits over time. They were cheap, easy to produce, easy to embed with tech, and gender non-specific. She pulled it on, and it fit like a second skin. The fabric had a pattern she wasn't familiar with small raised hexagons all over, giving it a reptilian appearance. It appeared to be standard issue with no embedded tech, or any of the Phalosian military extras that she was accustomed to. Next came a black overcoat. It had a high collar, then fell from her shoulders in graceful folds with flashes of the dark gold in the lining and no sleeves. Compared to Phalosian fashion, which tended to soft fabrics and floating silks, or jumpsuits alone while on ship, she felt like she was drowning in fabric. Maral looked at herself in the mirror. She barely recognized herself. She grudgingly admitted that her cropped silver hair and red-brown skin looked good against the dark red and black, which seemed prominent in Malurian design. The colouring threw her Phalosian yellow eyes into sharp focus. The effect was enhanced further when she pulled the deep hood over herself. She looked dangerous, like a predatory bird. Laughing at her own silliness, she tugged the hood back down and took a deep breath. She had to make this work. This was her mission, and like it or not, she would be tied to this male for the rest of her life. It was up to them whether or not that life was miserable. When she exited the cabin, MakenRoy stood in the empty corridor, fully clothed. Clearly he had found another shower somewhere else. The moment drew out awkwardly between them before MakenRoy spoke. "My apologies, Maral, I didn't mean to come on so strong. I know this is sudden and a difficult thing for you. In my defense, this is sudden for me too." He looked away, uncertain. "My first mating was a political alliance, and it was unsatisfying for us both. I will do my duty, but I do not wish to put either of us through what I went through before." Maral smiled, hiding a spike of pain as she caught a backwash of guilt, regret, and anger from him. It caught her by surprise, the first truly powerful emotion she had sensed from him. She pulled herself back into her emotional core, protecting her empathy from his corrosive emotions. "I understand. This will be a difficult adjustment for both of us. We must give it time." He cursed and squeezed his fist. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "That. The formality. You become the cadet with me when you don't wish to discuss something. You retreat behind the wall of formality and ice." Stung, Maral narrowed her eyes at him. "I am the cadet. Always. This is who you are mating." "That's not what I mean." She stabbed a finger at him. You seem desperate to draw us into a weird, forced intimacy that does not yet exist. We are not lovers racing to a mating. We don't know each other. I will do my best not to make this more difficult for us, but I will not pretend who I am and what I feel." He hissed at her, anger producing a rattle somewhere in his chest. "I see you, Maral, better than you think. I am Malurian. We observe, analyze, put the pieces together. We see to the heart of things." He took a couple of steps away, squeezing his fists. "I like the cadet. I like her toughness, her strength, her loyalty. She's an excellent tactician and soldier." He clenched his fists reflexively once more. "But I have no wish to battle with my mate. When you are faced with emotions you do not wish to confront, you retreat to the cadet fortress in your mind." Maral's anger detonated. "I am an empath, you asshole. Of course I don't want to deal with your emotions. My boundaries keep me sane. I have a fortress in my mind because I need it." She threw her hands up into the air. "If I don't retreat from other people's emotions, they contaminate mine, and I don't know what the hell I'm feeling myself." She spun away from him and paced the corridor. Emotions can't be forced. They must develop over time through hundreds of little interactions and gestures. Anything else is just a biochemical stew, bonding for procreation. Once again, she clawed herself away from her anger, breathing deeply to find her calm. "Do not push me, MakenRoy." Her words held the echo of finality. The tension stretched before he nodded in agreement. "Very well, I understand. And for what it's worth, I apologize again." He gestured stiffly down the corridor. "If you would follow me, I will take you to the garden, where we can get some food." She sighed, aware that they were both frustrated. More discussion would only result in hurt on both sides. She fell in beside him as he guided her through several floors and endless utilitarian corridors, all decorated in shades of black, red, and gold. The silence sat uncomfortably between them. She refused to break it. If he wanted to talk, he could make the effort. Eventually, he did. "All Malurian vessels have a garden space. We don't do well with reproduced foodstuffs over extended periods. Our digestion is finely tuned. We have ultimately found it more effective for spaceflight to create a garden in each vessel. Welcome to the atrium." When they walked into the garden, Maral's breath caught. It was stunning. It was a riot of colour and scents. Large fungi and trees were everywhere, with neat vegetable beds sitting underneath. Fruit hung low on vines that wound around seating areas with small tables, where more than a dozen other Malurians were sitting in various small groups, eating. They meandered through the large space, comparable to the size of a cargo hold in a normal vessel, towards a central area where an ancient Malurian was preparing food in a small open kitchen. "Greetings, honoured grandmother. We wish to eat. We will take whatever the day's special is." The ancient one smiled benevolently at MakenRoy, then turned her beady gaze on Maral. Her red eyes had dulled to a dark maroon, and her skin was rough and horned, her head ridge prominent. "So this is the human female that thinks to mate into our royal house?" Maral smiled widely, appreciating the elder's sass. "No, honoured grandmother, I'm afraid you're misinformed." The ancient blinked in surprise as Maral continued, gesturing to MakenRoy. "This is the Malurian royal that thinks to mate into the house of a Philosian founding family, and possibly bag Maluria another planet in the process." MakenRoy was startled into booming laughter that had heads turning in their direction. The crone pointed at her with a spoon. "You'll keep this one on his horns, all right." She ladled up a selection of vegetables and something that looked like rice and handed them 2 bowls. MakenRoy led them to a bench a little away from the others, under a hanging fruit vine. Maral poked at her food. "What are these?" "Root vegetables and fried vuzi." "Vuzi?" Maral queried as her HUD tried to translate the unfamiliar word. "Vuzi, a form of worm very popular." MakenRoy scooped up a spoonful and chewed, his eyes closed in bliss. "Try it. You'll be surprised. They are sweet and crunchy." Maral looked suspiciously at the food and sighed. She tentatively took a bite and was pleased to discover that he was right. They had a crunchy texture and a slight sweetness. Tucking in with more enthusiasm, they sat companionably in the simulated light of the garden, just enjoying the sounds and smells around them. Slowly she felt the tension melt, the craziness of the past few days draining away as she let the peace of the garden fill her. Tentatively she extended a tendril to the surrounding plants and received a muted, welcoming buzz. "This is nice," he nodded. "You seem happy here," she shrugged. "I like plants. They give off a cheerful buzz. It mutes people's emotions a little, means that I can relax my shields. His eyes brightened with interest. Do you have to shield all the time? She nodded, taking another big bite and chewing slowly, while she considered how much to say. Most Philosians are empaths. Like any other talent, it varies widely based on natural ability and training. In Philosia's history, the original colonists believed that strong mental skills would be a useful adaptation. They genetically engineered for a whole range of psychic skills, telepathy, telekinesis, and more. She wrinkled her nose. Too late, they realized the issues that would occur when an entire society suddenly became able to hear each other's thoughts. It was a disaster. It took 50 years to dial it back enough for society to function, and now they actively remove most of the genetic strains that create any mental skill other than empathy. He had stopped eating, his attention rapt on her. That was something she had noticed about him. Whatever he was doing, he paid 100% of his attention to. Being in that gaze was like being in front of a laser. She wondered what it would be like to have all that energy and attention focused on her in another setting. But, he prompted, but they can't get rid of all the markers, not without removing empathy. Sometimes two people's DNA combines and produces an individual that has skills other than empathy. This happened to you? She nodded. I have telepathy and empathy. I must shield all the time, or the roaring of other people's thoughts is deafening. It's like trying to function in a nightclub with people screaming at you and noise pumping. You get flashes of conversations, thoughts, ideas all the time. He turned to face her, setting his bowl aside. Can you read my mind? She shook her head. No, and I wouldn't even if I could. Reading the mind of a partner is a terrible idea. We all think thoughts occasionally that are unkind or uncharitable. That we choose not to say or act on them is the measure of our character. He nodded in understanding, a cheeky smile forming. This is true. I have had some uncharitable thoughts about you already today. She laughed and tapped him on his knee in reprimand. Me too. Let's keep them to ourselves, shall we? Maral picked at her bowl some more. Tell me about your family, your sons. He shrugged. I was mated before. It was an arranged marriage. Ruya, my first mate, was a scientist. We were kind to each other, but we did not enjoy each other's company and spent the minimum required. We produced our sons and raised them together. She was an excellent parent. His face was solemn. She died in a flyer accident. It was sudden and difficult for the boys. I requested a leave of absence from my ambassadorial duties for a year, but eventually had to return to work. For the past 2 years, my sons have lived with my mother. It has given them a stability that I never could have. Do you talk much? I try to. We call twice per week, and I return home every couple of months. He grimaced. This is the longest I have ever been away, and I have never gone weeks without contact. I was able to message them while we were on summer to tell them I'm alive and returning home. Maral's stomach dropped, guilt gnawing at her insides. I am sorry. If I had known you had children, I would have allowed you to contact them. He smiled tightly. I would have done anything to prevent you from finding out. I do not share my weaknesses with my enemies. Maral nodded, accepting the barb. MakenRoy stood and extended a hand. Shall we walk? She nodded, accepting the offer, and allowed herself to be hauled to her feet. What about your granddaughter? Her heart clenched. My Liara was a scholar, the first female in our family in 3 generations that did not take military or political service. She met a Svobodan male at a university where she was a visiting professor, and they conceived Varis. Maral stopped in front of a flower bed, watching the little blooms. Liara did not understand how the Svobodans view offspring. For all her intelligence, she could be naive. The sire did not want a daughter. Svobodans do not value females. The memories clogged her throat. My apologies, Maral. You don't need to discuss this if it distresses you. He reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently in support. She reached up and gripped his hand where it lay, grateful for his understanding. It's all right, I don't talk about it much. Liara and Varis moved back to Philosia. 7 years later, Liara died. It was a freak accident. She fell surfing and drowned before anyone could reach her. Varis has lived with my mother since. She is 10 now and has spent the past 3 years living with my mother on Philosia. She patted his hand and he reluctantly let her move away. My mother loves her but is nearly 300 years old. She does not wish to raise another child. One of the reasons I took the assignment at Dalat was that it was meant to be quiet. Varis could come and have a childhood running wild in the forests on a calm, quiet planet. She could be a child, Maral laughed bitterly, furious at the goddess all over again for the hand dealt to Liara and Varys. Clearly my family has offended the goddess in some way, or perhaps she's just a bitch with a terrible sense of humour. MakenRoy huffed a quiet laugh. Sometimes I look at Maluriens, the mountain where our god lives in Malurian legend, and wonder if he is napping in front of the sacred hearth. There is no other explanation for the atrocities in the world. She sniggered, appreciating his attempt to buoy her spirits. Perhaps this mating is a gift, an attempt to set these injustices right. Perhaps together we can offer the young the chances they had been denied. Perhaps. It was a nice thought, the nice.